But notwithstanding this request, notwithstanding the tone of anguish in which it was uttered, the door remained closed. Villefort burst it open with a violent blow. At the entrance of the room which led to her boudoir, Madame de Villefort was standing erect, pale, her features contracted, and her eyes glaring horribly. "Eloise, Eloise," he said, "what is the matter?" "Speak." The young woman extended her stiff white hands towards him. "It is done, monsieur," she said with a rattling noise which seemed to tear her throat. "What more do you want?" And she fell full length on the floor. Villefort ran to her and seized her hand, which convulsively clasped a crystal bottle with a golden stopper. Madame de Villefort was dead. Villefort, maddened with horror, stepped back to the threshold of the door, fixing his eyes on the corpse. "My son!" he exclaimed suddenly, "where is my son? Edward, Edward!" And he rushed out of the room, still crying, "Edward, Edward!" The name was pronounced in such a tone of anguish that the servants ran up. "Where is my son?" asked Villefort. "Let him be removed from the house, that he may not see." "Master Edward is not downstairs, sir," replied the valet. "Then he must be playing in the garden. Go and see." "No, sir. Madame de Villefort sent for him half an hour ago. He went into her room, and has not been downstairs since." A cold perspiration burst out on Villefort's brow, his legs trembled, and his thoughts flew about madly in his brain like the wheels of a disordered watch. "In Madame de Villefort's room?" he murmured and slowly returned, with one hand wiping his forehead, and with the other supporting himself against the wall. To enter the room he must again see the body of his unfortunate wife. To call Edward he must reawaken the echo of that room which now appeared like a sepulchre. To speak seemed like violating the silence of the tomb. His tongue was paralyzed in his mouth. "Edward!" he stammered, "Edward!" The child did not answer. Where, then, could he be, if he had entered his mother's room and not since returned? He stepped forward. The corpse of Madame de Villefort was stretched across the doorway leading to the room in which Edward must be, Those glaring eyes seemed to watch over the threshold, and the lips bore the stamp of a terrible and mysterious irony. Through the open door was visible a portion of the boudoir, containing an upright piano and a blue satin couch. Villefort stepped forward 2 or 3 paces, and beheld his child lying no doubt asleep on the sofa. The unhappy man uttered an exclamation of joy. A ray of light seemed to penetrate the abyss of despair and darkness. He had only to step over the corpse, enter the boudoir, take the child in his arms, and flee far, far away. Villefort was no longer the civilized man, he was a tiger hurt unto death, gnashing his teeth in his wound. He no longer feared realities, but phantoms. He leapt over the corpse as if it had been a burning brazier. He took the child in his arms, embraced him, shook him, called him, but the child made no response. He pressed his burning lips to the cheeks, but they were icy cold and pale. He felt the stiffened limbs, he pressed his hand upon the heart, but it no longer beat, the child was dead. A folded paper fell from Edward's breast. Villefort, thunderstruck, fell upon his knees, the child dropped from his arms, and rolled on the floor by the side of its mother. He picked up the paper, and, recognizing his wife's writing, ran his eyes rapidly over its contents. It ran as follows. You know that I was a good mother, since it was for my son's sake I became criminal. A good mother cannot depart without her son. Villefort could not believe his eyes, he could not believe his reason. He dragged himself towards the child's body, and examined it as a lioness contemplates its dead cub. Then a piercing cry escaped from his breast, and he cried. Still the hand of God. The presence of the 2 victims alarmed him, he could not bear solitude shared only by 2 corpses. Until then he had been sustained by rage, by his strength of mind, by despair, by the supreme agony which led the Titans to scale the heavens, and Ajax to defy the gods. He now arose, his head bowed beneath the weight of grief, and, shaking his damp, disheveled hair, he who had never felt compassion for any one determined to seek his father, that he might have someone to whom he could relate his misfortunes, someone by whose side he might weep. He descended the little staircase with which we are acquainted, and entered Noirtier's room. The old man appeared to be listening attentively and as affectionately as his infirmities would allow to the Abbé Busoni, who looked cold and calm, as usual. Villefort, perceiving the abbé, passed his hand across his brow. He recollected the call he had made upon him after the dinner at Auteuil, and then the visit the abbé had himself paid to his house on the day of Valentine's death. "You hear, sir?" he exclaimed. "Do you, then, never appear but to act as an escort to death?" Busoni turned around, and, perceiving the excitement depicted on the magistrate's face, the savage luster of his eyes, he understood that the revelation had been made at the assizes, but beyond this he was ignorant. "I came to pray over the body of your daughter." "And now why are you here?" "I come to tell you that you have sufficiently repaid your debt, and that from this moment I will pray to God to forgive you, as I do." "Good heavens!" exclaimed Villefort, stepping back fearfully. "Surely that is not the voice of the Abbé Busoni." "No." The abbé threw off his wig, shook his head, and his hair, no longer confined, fell in black masses around his manly face. "It is the face of the Count of Monte Cristo," exclaimed the procureur, with a haggard expression. "You are not exactly right, M. Procureur, you must go farther back." That voice, that voice! Where did I first hear it?"